Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
I've been having a lot of conversations recently, like formal broadcast conversations with Christians. I was recently contacted by the organizers of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. They normally meet in person with a big audience in Texas, but of course, because of COVID, they've had to transition to online. So we did a Zoom call, and for 2 hours, I fielded questions, mostly from believers. And they were, they didn't come after me, but you hear a lot of the same kinds of stuff. Some logical fallacies in there. When did you decide to become an atheist? And of course, I disagree with the premise of the question. I didn't decide not to believe. I just admitted it. When you turned your back on Christianity, Seth, that's one phrasing that's, I guess, factually accurate, but the implication is that I just turned away from God in rebellion, right? When you turned your back on God, there was another one. What was it? Didn't you just replace one religion with another religion, right? We've all heard the position that atheism is just another religion, or it takes more faith to be an atheist, that kind of thing. So anyway, I did 2 hours of that. But I think they're going to officially release the video later on this month. If you're interested, just check their website, atheistchristianbookclub.com. But I had another opportunity to talk to a Christian on his broadcast. Hammett Mehta over at Friendly Atheist connected us. He said, hey, look, there's this guy, and his name is David Metcalf, and he runs a show called The Refreshingly Honest Christian. Now, hang on. I can hear the cynic in you. Because you and I don't think that Christianity is rooted in the facts or in the truth, so how could you possibly be honest when you promote it? Just hang on. I think it speaks more to intent. When I was a Christian, I didn't feel like I was being dishonest with people. When I was out spreading the gospel and talking about my Jesus, I really felt like I was telling the truth and doing the right thing and trying to make a better world. So my intent was not to be dishonest, but I'm interested in why a Christian would have a show called The Refreshingly Honest Christian. What's he implying about the rest of the faith? So I guested on his show, and I asked if it'd be okay if I rebroadcast that conversation here for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's an example about two people on opposite sides of an important subject can have a respectful and friendly conversation, because we did. Secondly, I am convinced that David, who officially identifies as a Christian, is on a journey. He actually admits that during the show, like he's on a journey. And he's having to sort of reevaluate some key things. And so as he and I were having this candid exchange about Christianity and the Bible and blah, 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 you can really hear a guy who is genuinely interested in what is right and what is wrong with this faith. And I would be hugely curious to see where this journey takes David in the days, months, and years ahead. Where's he going to be a year from now? Well, he might be a more devout fundamentalist Christian, but I kind of doubt it. And when you hear this conversation, I think you'll understand why. So this is the rebroadcast with David's permission of the Refreshingly Honest Christian show. I've sliced out the first 15 minutes because it's just my backstory, which you have heard 1,000 times, and that allows us to get into the meat of the conversation. I hope you enjoy. You know, it was interesting when you sent me the invitation to speak, and I'm so glad to be here.
Cool. Yeah,
I'm like you. I'm all about conversation.
Yeah.
When you said it's called refreshingly honest, and I thought, well, you know, do you have the position that you think a lot of Christians are? Because I don't know. I mean, like when I was a devout believer, I wasn't lying to people. I felt like I was genuinely, honestly sharing my faith and what I felt like was the truth. I mean, do you feel like there is enough dishonesty that, you know, there is a need for refreshingly honest Christianity? I was just kind of trying to reverse engineer the name. I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the question. I think more and more people, particularly millennials, are looking outside of the church because what they're getting on a Sunday, what they're getting from a pastor in particular, is it's the party line. It's the thing that you're supposed to say because you work at a church to keep the donations coming in. And that bleeds into us as Christians, those who are, you know, following these pastors, right? Like, I think by and large, Christianity, there's this culture of fake it till you make it, so to speak, or just pretend, just stuff it down like, you know, this is the magic kingdom, right? And so, I definitely thought in naming the podcast, there's a huge need for honesty because I don't see a whole lot of honesty. I think a lot of conversations that I've had with church leaders or just even friends, it's like, well, here's what I really believe, but I can't share that, you know, otherwise I'd lose my job, or here's what I really think. And so that disconnect between who you are on a Sunday, or it's just so off-putting. And
well, I mean, I think a lot of people are afraid of, I mean, if you say I doubt or I'm not sure or I have questions, a lot of people flip out. You know, I've talked to people who are involved in ministry in churches, you know, they're deacons or on the worship team or even pastors, you know. And you're right. If they were to say, man, you know, I struggle with this. This doesn't make any sense to me. And if they were to just be honest, the fact that they were not, the word's not perfect, but you know what I mean? They didn't have this clear black and white line, belief, non-belief. They weren't there solidly 1,000%. For them would threaten. It threatens the structure. It threatens the faith. It threatens the reputation of the church, and those people are often cast off.
Yeah.
And so what they do is they take the very human journey that they're on and they cram them down into their gut and they say nothing, and they're just tortured by it. And I think, wouldn't the best teachings of Jesus welcome an honest conversation about this stuff? You know, when did it not be okay to be human and to say, you know what, I don't get this. And I'd like a good answer on this. I think that's a valid question. And then someone else can say, you know what, here's kind of what I think, but you're right. Well, let's talk some more about it. Instead, you know, the walls go up and the platitudes come out and the judgment, you know, kicks in and people flip out. And meanwhile, many of the people who flip out, if they're to be honest with themselves, they're having the same conversations. You know, they're on the outside, they're sure. On the inside, you know, I'm not going to say it out loud because the consequences to me might be dire. I totally understand what you're talking about.
Well, and who is it serving at the end of the day? If your whole job is to help lead or guide or, you know, shepherd people, you know, that's not serving anybody. Rob Bell, I'm sure you'll remember him. Yeah. We just had him on the podcast, and he's the person who was like the most honest when Love Wins came out, speaking of hell. And in the church, they exiled him for it. They couldn't.
Dude, I was still in the faith when he came out and said he didn't buy that hell was a moral thing. He didn't think God would ever use it. And my church, I think they even preached a message wrapped around him.
Yeah.
That he'd watered down his faith and he'd walked away and no, this is not God's will. I mean, he was like an object lesson.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing get that you got him on your show. That must have been a compelling conversation. So I didn't mean to interrupt. Forgive me. I was I was on the top of my tongue, you know.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that. Well, you mentioned you know, your church, they gave an entire like message.
Where was I
around it?
Where was I? I can't remember. I don't think I'm not imagining it, but I remember it was either him or it was the pastor, it was definitely Carlton Pearson. He was the pastor of a local church called Higher Dimensions, right? Dynamic Bible believing church. And he came to this point when he was like, hell makes no moral sense. This is not what Jesus would ever do. So he walked away, and this whole city cast him off.
Yeah.
His church cast him off. I remember going to a church called Grace Fellowship. They did a whole sermon talking about how he had they didn't say he'd lost his mind, but I mean, it was just that kind of thing. Like, this man he's not preaching. He's a false prophet, or it was something along those lines.
Yeah.
And, talk about a guy being true to himself with everything on the line.
Yeah.
He was on the top of the world. He was speaking all around the world. He was successful in almost every sense of the word. But by coming forward and saying, no, I got to take a moral stand, he paid a massive price for doing it. I reached out to Carlton Pearson to see if he'd ever talked to me. He never got a response. Sometimes the word atheist in your show title scares. I don't know why. Maybe he didn't even see the message. But Rob Bell's another great example. He was true to himself and his own moral compass, and a lot of people cast him out.
Yeah, well, that really did coincide with a big part of my story, so I wasn't raised Christian. My whole background was, if anything, we never went to church. My grandparents who raised me, we never talked about God. And I feel like in the U.S., if there was like a default sort of religion, it would be Christianity. So in that sense, I think there's that gravitational pull. But when I first started going to church, one of the first Sundays I remember I vividly have this picture of walking into the church, and the pastor is talking about Rob Bell, and he's saying that this man is a heretic, and he, what he's, in this book, like, it is false doctrine. Do not read this. And I'm like, I don't even know who this guy is. I would have never known who this person is had you not brought it to my attention. So, it was really surreal talking to him, just because that, in my mind, and also just to give you a little bit more background. So, as I really started to take my faith seriously, my progression was always, I wanted to be a pastor. That was always the trajectory for me. And so, I did the internships. I went to Bible college. I, did a few years in ministry. And, psychologically, like, from like a tribalistic sense, like, you see how Christians really do, like, shoot their own. like I've heard prominent pastors say, Christians or the church, it's like the only army that shoots its wounded.
I think you'll find that in a lot of tribes, but it's hugely prevalent and very ironic in Christianity. There is no doubt.
Yeah. But it was just, for me, as somebody who does have doubts, somebody who does have questions, like, and really hell in particular, that was always the thing that I just could not stomach. Like, even in the sense, like, oh, well, don't worry, like, you have afterlife insurance, like, Jesus has saved you, you're good. Like, beyond, I'm like, no, like, I don't know that I can accept this idea that people who I know who are good people, and who, by the way, are far more Christ-like than many Christians that I know, are going to hell simply for the fact that the way that their intellectual furniture is arranged, they believe the right set of ideas or beliefs or whatever. And so, even on this podcast, that's definitely been something where it's just become more and more defined, where I'm like, yeah, I don't believe this, And so partly the reason why I even stuck with the name Christian was because I'm like, I feel like I want to reclaim that word, because I feel like, first of all, that name is just, Trump is a Christian. So what does that tell you?
Well, he claims to be. I get that. Well, I talk to a lot of people who are professing Christians, and their Christianities, you can just drive down the street. There's the First Baptist Church. They disagree with the Second Baptist Church, who disagrees with the Family Church, who disagrees with the Lutheran, the Methodist, the Catholic, somebody. We talk about God is supposedly not the author of confusion. Can you think of a faith more confused, more contradictory? Everybody's preaching a different shade of a book that's supposed to be the instruction manual for living. And then more and more here, and you mentioned that millennials not interested in fundamentalism. They're not getting what they need from the church. They don't want to be judgmental like their parents and grandparents. They don't hate gay people, and they don't believe in hellfire, and they don't want to run around just judging all the time. But I think part of the challenge is if you are walking away from fundamentalism, is there a problem with your religion's fundamentals?
Yeah.
What kind of religious faith are you practicing? Then what role does the Bible, the foundational book of Christianity, play? A lot of people walk away from the Bible, and then it's about a personal relationship, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a religion, it's a relationship. My God speaks to me, we talk, I feel him in my heart. And then that becomes a challenge because the Islamist says the same thing. I feel Allah in my heart, and he has told me that he's real. And, it could be Krishna, it could be any God anywhere, your personal experience. So if I'm a neutral observer and I'm at a table with all of these different people who are claiming a personal experience, they've walked away from the Bible or their holy book, and they say, well, it's about this intangible thing that only I can really experience under my skin. How would I, as a neutral observer, be able to determine which one, if any of them, was real?
Right.
And beyond that, is there a red flag? Is there a flashing light, an alarm light, if you have to say, well, I reject this scripture? Like, I don't judge gay people, so I'm going to just ignore or reject the verses where God had homosexuals killed, executed in the Bible. I've decided that those are not moral, or they were for another time, and I'm just going to walk over. So that becomes this weird, subjective, arbitrary journey where you're just sort of cherry picking.
Right.
This opens up a big can of worms.
Right.
How do you get to where you are in your own sort of custom fitted faith?
Right.
And I think that's a question that a lot of people inside and outside of religions, they have to face.
Oh, totally. Yeah. That whole idea of cherry picking, it's something that I've run into on this podcast. Like, I've been accused of having, well, you have holes in your theology. And I'm like, well, there's just certain things that I can't buy, but I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there's a lot here that I do struggle with, that I wrestle with, but there's also a lot here that I think is good and worthwhile, and it does have the ability to, it has shaped me for the better. I can't deny that. Like, a lot of the experience that I've had with the church, yes, there's been a lot of bad, and I won't deny that at all. And we've gone at great length on this podcast, but there's also a lot of good, and I don't want to discount that. But yeah, it's a strange phenomenon where it is, I think for me, more and more, I'm just hoping that, and I feel like the Thinking Atheist, like, you have these resources where I feel like you're giving people the ability to explore. Like you mentioned, what really stuck out to me at the beginning, you mentioned like I had to keep going. And I feel like a lot of people would identify with that, where they're just like, yeah, I don't really know what I believe, to be honest. Like, I don't really know. Yeah, like, I might have some holes in my theology. Like, I definitely don't want to be a cafeteria Christian, that whole idea, but I just don't know what I believe right now. And I think a lot of us feel this pressure to just have it figured out, and to have a 10 bullet point list of, well, here's what I believe, here's why, and it's bulletproof. We like clean lines, don't we? Yeah.
We like it to be cut and dry. Well, I'm going to make clear to anybody on your audience, I am not the Thinking Atheist. Okay?
Oh, okay.
The Thinking Atheist is, I don't proclaim. I host a show in Sight and Community called The Thinking Atheist.
Yeah.
I am not a great mind. Okay. I'm just a dude. The Thinking Atheist is an icon, and the icon represents the rejection of faith. Christopher Hitchens once said, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. I don't think faith is a satisfying way to determine what's true. You can take anything on faith. The Islamist takes the Quran on faith. You've got people of all religions. You got people who believe all kinds of things, and they do it on faith. That's a belief over knowledge position.
Yeah.
And it becomes even more problematic when we see that Christianity and many religions, that's a belief culture. God, Jesus said, "You believed in God, also believe also in me." We are the Christians commanded to believe. Confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart God raised him from the dead. So to be commanded to believe something is a weird thing. Because I don't think, like, I don't choose to believe in gravity. You can hang me over a building and you can say, all right, I want you with a gun to your head to not believe in gravity. Well, I already have that. I know it works. I know there is gravity. I didn't choose this. And I think to a lot of people, they struggle with non-belief, but they verbally dress it as belief because they are commanded to sort of volunteer that, to express that, to outwardly live that. And man, I sure would like to see a culture where we're more interested in knowing for sure. And here's the rub. We hate I don't know as an answer. How did the universe begin then, Seth, if God didn't conjure it? And I have to look you in the eye and be like, I don't know. I do not know. And you don't know either, right? That's kind of how I follow it up. You have a story, but I don't know. And it's a phrase, I think, and an answer that we have to be prepared to be honest about.
Yeah.
We don't know a lot of stuff. And if we don't know, this fake it till you make it thing that you mentioned, the honest response is to say, I don't know, but let's commit ourselves as best we can to trying to find out.
Yeah.
And if we don't, we still have to be honest about the idea that we don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing to do in a confidence culture where you're supposed to just name it and claim it.
Yeah, totally. Gosh, name it and claim it. I just wince at that.
My mom came from that kind of church.
Yeah.
You all you have to do is believe it and claim it. God's going to provide. Of course, it was a nebulous provision. You may get a check in the mail, or it may be a job promotion in 10 years, or it might be a jewel in your crown after you die. There's like, what exactly am I getting, and what I've claimed? So they, there's kind of a silly putty answer. They could mold it into whatever they wanted when you named it and claimed it.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, Seth, I have a question for you. I asked this to Hemant when he was on, and I found it to be a very curious answer, and I loved it. And so I'd just be curious to know what you would think. So obviously, given your background, this little crazy little subculture well, this weird, wacky world of Christendom. I wonder for you, given some perspective, obviously 2008, like a little over 10 years, like you've kind of been outside of this world of, you now identify as an atheist. Where do you feel like we've gotten Jesus wrong most as a whole? Like when you look at the church today.
Well, there's so much to unpack here. We can approach it, the Christ story, historically, meaning that the Jesus story originates in the Gospels of the New Testament, which were written long decades after the alleged life and death of Jesus Christ. I think the earliest gospel was written in 79 CE. Christ, if he had existed, was long gone. There are different Jesuses in the different gospels. So if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is actually described in different ways. He does different things, like he lived differently, he was born differently, he died differently. So there is a contradictory element to the Christ story. I mean, there are 4 conflicting versions of the empty tomb, his last words on the cross, the centurion's request, how he was born, where he went after he gave the Sermon on the Mount. That there are so many conflicting stories. I think you have to get into the fact that this is not corroborated by any contemporary historian. A great example is when Christ died on the cross, and then all of a sudden the saints were resurrected and they walked the streets of Jerusalem. What a historic event. The undead saints were walking a parade through Jerusalem, and yet not one contemporary historian looked around and thought, well, this is newsworthy. It's written, no one else reported this story. So, you've got the historical problems. You've also got the moral problems, because the Bible can be whatever I want it to be. It can be a good book or it can be a terrible book. So while Jesus did talk about some wonderful stuff that we can take inspiration from, helping the poor and charity and turning the other cheek, which I think is sometimes good, not always, don't be vengeful, be kind, be good to people. He also said in Matthew that he hadn't come to bring peace. He came to bring a sword. And if it meant turning families against each other in this popularity contest, he was prepared. for a father to hate his son, a mother to hate her daughter. This is not a moral teaching. You also have the idea that in the Holy Trinity, Jesus and Yahweh are the same. And Yahweh is a genocidal maniac, jealous and petty and nasty and cruel, who killed hundreds of thousands of people at a time, who received burnt human sacrifice with Jephthah's daughter and inflicted plagues. And I mean, it's just insanity. It's ordering his armies, Moses' armies in to execute pregnant women and unborn babies. I mean, and that's, if Jesus and Yahweh are the same, now you've got a moral problem.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think after that, you've got this idea that most people's Jesus reflects their own culture. I mean, there's a reason that we have white Jesus in the United States, and we have a brown Jesus in the Middle East, and there's an Asian Jesus, and there's a Native American Jesus, and there's every culture has decided that Jesus looks like them.
Yeah.
This is common with cultures and their religions. Their gods are reflections of them and validations of them personally. Those are just three of many challenges I have with this notion of Jesus Christ. I do think if you don't take him as a literal God-man who walked the earth, and I don't know if there was an actual guy, I don't think anybody can know at this measure, we can still look through the New Testament and find some stuff like we can in a lot of other texts and say, well, that's a good teaching. I'll grab that. Charity and goodness and kindness and hanging out with people who are disadvantaged to make their lives better. I mean, we can grab those nuggets and we can implement those in our lives, but I don't think it requires a belief in a God man who walked the earth and did miracles.
Yeah. Gosh, so much to unpack there. You're just
what happens
killing
when you
these
have
answers.
A radio host on as a guest. I just blather on.
No,
blah,
I love
blah,
it.
Blah, blah, blah.
No, it's good. Yeah. Two things come to mind. So the first, Hemant, one of the things he said, I think Christians like the idea of Jesus more than anything he actually said, which I resonated with.
That may be true.
And I mean, it's funny, like the second thing I think of when you talk about like this difference between like this Old Testament God and Jesus, it's like recently I came across a tweet. Somebody said like, well, Trump has COVID, obviously. It's like, yes, I'm praying for Trump, but I'm praying to the Old Testament God.
That's brutal.
That's brutal. Yeah.
That's brutal.
Yeah. No, well, I think that's so fascinating. And I think, for me, there's this whole idea of literalism, reading the Bible literally. And for so many people, it's like, you can read it exactly, and that's exactly as it happened. And like you said, there's these differences even amongst the Gospels. Like there's inconsistencies, there's different accounts. Like, I mean, for me, it's one of the things that I've kind of moved towards. And even you talked about this idea, like, is that a metaphor? Is that for me, I've kind of moved away from this idea of like if we found out that Jesus was not a real person who existed at a place and time, it's like the story itself, I feel like there's like this mythology in the sense that like the story itself that it's telling, I think it has the ability to transform and help people. It also has the ability to really cause a lot of harm. We see that in a lot of ways, like the way that the Bible is used to justify a lot of horror. Like, I was just watching a documentary about fundamentalist Christians trying to overturn Roe v. Wade. And it's like, and to them, it's like this idea that's like, but that's the most godlike thing. And it's like, I don't know. It's just interesting, man. I could talk about this stuff all day. So I don't know. So
if you were to then open the Quran and you were to find some meritorious verses about love and goodness and whatnot in the Quran, would you be able to extract enough? Let's say you were able to extract enough from the Quran, you're grabbing the good philosophies for living. Would you then be comfortable calling yourself like a practicing Muslim of some stripe?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and to your point earlier, and this isn't me trying to dodge it, I promise.
No, you're fine.
Like if I were born in India, I'd probably be a Hindu. Like, there's that idea of, and again, I concede that's a part of it. Like, even though I wasn't raised in a Christian environment, a Christian family, like, let's not be oblivious to the fact that in Western culture, Christianity is like what we gravitate towards. So, Yeah, I would have to say that. I think so. And I think for me, I've never been more open to different ancient texts like the Quran or the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. I always screw the actual name up, so I just call it the Gita.
I got you. Totally. I'm tracking totally. I got you.
So yeah, in terms of like, would I call myself that? I think it's interesting. Like initially I'm like, I hesitate saying yes, but again, it's like, if you find that this story or this makes the most sense to you, I think you would have to say that. And so I think for me, I hope that I'm in a place of openness, and that's where I'm at honestly right now. Like I'm still holding on to this, I guess, blanket term of Christian because, it's kind of the idea of like, you dance with the one who brung you, that kind of idea.
That's a great line. That's a great line for religion. Yeah.
Totally. So I'm definitely in that space, I think. But as I explore, I am so far out there where I'm like, I think to a lot of Christians in particular, and we have a lot of Christian listeners, it's like, they're afraid for me. Like, oh, you're falling away. And it's like, no, man, like the God that I believe in is so much bigger than our little thing we've reduced it to, the little divisions that we have to like, well, I'm in this tribe and you're in that tribe. And like you said, all these different denominations of like, well, we've interpreted it correctly and we've got it. It's like, I don't know, man. I think, and what I've loved so much about this conversation is I feel like I would have to say, I agree with you on more things than I don't. And it doesn't matter what we call ourselves to a certain degree. And I think more and more, if Christians in particular, because I feel like they're the ones who are the most divisive in this area, if Christians in particular could see that, the world would be a heck of a lot better place.
Short break. I'll be back with the rest of my conversation as I was guest on David Metcalf's podcast, The Refreshingly Honest Christian. Hang on. Quick note, I've been sending out a bunch of greets and shout-outs on Cameo for special occasions or whatever occasion. That's been a lot of fun. So you just sort of hire me for a few bucks. You go to cameo.com, you search my name, Seth Andrews, and then you tell me what you want me to send, like a greeting for somebody on their birthday, an anniversary, a whatever day. And then I'm just honored to be able to record that. I do that here, and then it shoots out to them, and they get a surprise greeting. Hi, this is Seth. Happy birthday, happy anniversary, happy graduation. I mean, whatever special occasion that you come up with, or just because somebody needs a boost. It has been a ball. I've done a few dozen of them so far. It helps to fund my work. If you would like a special greeting sent to someone you know and love, go to cameo.com and search my name, Seth Andrews. Speaking with David Metcalf on his broadcast, the Refreshingly Honest Christian podcast. I am replaying it here with his permission. It's interesting because we've been hearing David, who has been walking away, or actually stating that he doesn't really hold to the fundamentals of Christianity, certainly the most judgmental and toxic parts of Christianity. His Christianity looks much, much different, and we pick up that conversation there.
Yeah,
so
man.
You realize now that the major denominations of this country would be horrified at a man like you, right? If you go to the Baptist Church's mission statement, the Assembly of God, their Bible is absolutely inerrant and perfect and literal and true. The Methodist, not quite as much. And then you drift into the Episcopals, et cetera,
Yeah.
But you said something that I want to, well, actually, let me preface, if your listeners would take the advice of an atheist.
Of course they would.
I mean, throw it out and you can take it or leave it. But I think David is, don't let me put words in your mouth, but the truth is, a worthy Jesus, a truly loving Jesus, he is not sitting around waiting for us to trip on the pebbles of theology. If Jesus exists, that Jesus loves us and gets that we're imperfect and gets that we're going to screw up and gets that, we're doing our best and we're just trying to figure it out and isn't going to freaking punish us when we screw up. It also, I think that line of thinking lends itself to the question of why in the world do apologists exist? Why do pithy humans who have screwed up everything else in the universe, apparently, why are they charged to explain God to everybody else? And why can't they agree with each other on the basics? I mean, you put 50 apologists in a room, ask them about a literal creation, 6-day creation. You ask them about, is the Holy Spirit, do you get it when you ask Jesus into your heart? Is that a separate prayer? Speaking in tongues? How do you baptize? Does Christ still do miracles today? Is hell a real fiery place, or is it just annihilation? I mean, just ask them the basics. And it's it's Thunderdome. They just lose their minds at each other, and I think God himself, I think he should bear the responsibility of parting the curtain of the sky and demonstrating himself without question if he exists. But beyond that, a worthy God, he's not going to sit around and find excuses to punish us for the imperfection that he knows we already have. A truly loving God would be like, they're doing their best. Now, how would you treat a regular child, one of your human children? You might disagree with the decision, or that's not how I would do it, or they made a mistake and they're trying to make it right, but they've got a good heart. I mean, you don't sit there and find reasons to penalize and punish. You think, well, I love this person. I'm going to help them however I can. I want them to be the best versions of themselves, and I'll always love and be there for them. That's what a parent does. Yeah. And I think, that's probably a meritorious view of a worthy Jesus Christ, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
Look, I'm married to a God believer. You know what I'm saying? I mean, she's a casual believer, but the idea that we have more in common than we have apart is often the case. I find it's true often beyond religion. Sometimes in political parties or philosophies, other examples of people who, we've got these points of division, maybe even contention. But if you look at the big picture, we love people and we want to do the right thing and we love to laugh and we want to try to build a better world, and we enjoy each other's company. Yeah. And this idea that an atheist can't befriend a Christian, can't befriend a Muslim, can't befriend a Scientologist, etc. And we can have our moments. And there are discussions to be had when, we get into things like bigotry and the dehumanization of others. But I mean, just people who have this disagreement, but who share that kind of, I genuinely want to do the right thing and I've got a good, kind heart. Those people, I think, should look past their differences or try to live around them, at least in a moment, to try to celebrate what they do have in common. We are all the human condition.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. I don't know about you, Dave, but in the Twitterverse, conversation seems to be dying. People are not talking to each other. They're kind of shouting at each other. And that's a bit disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's who has the most pithy comment to top what you said,
and I've been guilty.
Yeah. So same.
I have a surgical strike. I will go in and
I love it.
Throw out the zinger.
I love it.
I'm not proud of it, but at the same time, I find the word I like is de-escalation. There's this tendency to assume the worst about the other party because it's easier for me to win, quote unquote, if I demonize you.
Yeah.
If you are the worst person in the world, then all bets are off and I can be as awful as I need to be to put you down.
Yeah.
And that so often cheats us. It dehumanizes us. We start to go after this caricature of the person instead of the person itself. And when are minds going to be changed? If I shout at you and you shout at me, our walls go up. We fortify our positions. We're in a defensive posture. When the world of minds get changed, minds get changed when people operate with conversation in a position of safety.
Yeah.
And respect, mutual respect. And man, I'm a little scared. Like I'm scared of what social media has done to me and what it's doing to the culture and what the future holds. It's a little weird. I don't want to see interactions between human hearts go away because we've sacrificed it on the altar of 280 characters on Twitter.
Yeah. That's 100. That's spot on. And I feel like conversations like this, Seth, what we're doing right now, it's like, I mean, it's silly, but it's like, if you need to start a podcast to have conversations again, go for it. Yeah. I think the things that we've done the things we've cooked up to, like you said, demonize and the ways that we justify it, the things that I've heard Christians say, like, well, they've fallen away and they don't know the truth. We have the truth and they don't. Like all this unhelpful rhetoric that I would argue, number one, isn't true. and number two, it's just causing division. It's causing hatred oftentimes, it's why I'm sure you, even with the name Christian, like, oh God, I guess I'm going to go for this morning. Cause we're so exhausting. Like we're like, I don't like talking to Christians more than half the time. They always have their little quips. They always have their little thing that they need to defend. And it's well, some of it I think is a human thing. Like I know a lot of amazing religious people. And I know some horrible human beings who are professing atheists. And ultimately, it's not about the label. It's like, what kind of person are you? Yeah.
And I think the othering of people, it comes from a variety of places. I'm not a psychologist, but I've done a lot of this. I think sometimes it's there's fear, right? Fear of the other.
Yeah.
So the more people look like me, talk like me, act like me, think like me, the more validated I am. And if someone comes in and they're not doing it like me, I'm threatened by that because I'm not being validated in what I do. I think that's a position of really tragic insecurity.
Yeah.
I think there's a flavor of, there's a superiority complex. Some people like to walk in and simply just feel better than other people. They walk in and they're like, well, I'm looking down my nose from my high mountain at you, the unwashed, down in the trough.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of reasons that people kind of other people. And I'm not saying that tribes and communities don't have their uses. I think we're a communal, tribal kind of species. I think we crave getting together. I think that explains a lot of the attraction of the church. I mean, I understand church. Like, I totally get it. You come together with people of like mind. You're welcomed at the door. They offer you coffee. They've got a place for your kids. You get to enjoy communal music. You get to listen to hopefully an inspiring message,
right,
where you are sort of reinforced in a sense of inspiration and purpose. And these are the friends you have, the music that you love, the activities that you do, the clothes that you wear. It really is an attractive thing. I think that also keeps a lot of people from asking questions because, man, if I decide that the fundamentals of my faith don't make any sense morally, scientifically, historically, I don't want to lose my family. I don't want to lose my community. I love these people. I love going to church. I love doing these things. And I think the reason is because we're a naturally communal species. And even in the atheist culture, we get together. We have conventions and evenings at the pub. I'm not a drinker, but some people like to go out to the pub, or they have game night or movie night or whatever, because I think people have always loved to get together with people of common interest to share those interests. I mean, you see that at everything from Comic-Con to bowling night to a rock concert to something else. We as human beings, we love doing things together almost always. Mm-hmm. And, when your culture then is a religious one, I think it becomes a lot scarier to start to say, well, are the basic tenets of that religion factual? And if I challenge it, what are the relational, communal consequences to me? Will I lose the people I love and care about? And I understand that. I understand the appeal of church, and I understand a tremendous desire not to blow it.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to go off on bunny trail, but it just popped into my skull.
I love it. So. I wish more people thought like you did. And I think this conversation it's helping me. And you talked a little bit about fear. What it made me think of was there's also a fear of, I think, unknown. Like, this is classic hero's journey kind of mythology, which is, well, I don't know where this is going to take me. I don't want to talk to that person because I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to, I don't want to offend. I don't want to, all of this stuff where, we're at times where, like, I do feel like I'm, have I not studied enough? Is this person going to think I'm an idiot? Like, because I haven't read The God Delusion? Like,
no. Yeah.
No, and I'm not saying you, but just in particular, I think more and more, I think if we can get back to this sense of humanity and talking to one another, like you're describing. And I think no matter how you identify yourself, if you're a Christian, if you're atheist, if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, like, it is a deeply human thing to gather and to discuss and to bond over I just, man.
And what I love about you, David, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you are at this awesome point, I think many of us are, where you don't start with the answer with a capital A and then ask the question, right? Because that's a cheat. Okay, wait a minute. I think you're asking the questions and you are preparing yourself for an honest journey to try to discover the answer. And I'll be totally cool. I mean, if that answer is Jesus and you do it on your terms, cool. I mean, my big thing is that I think your life isn't being handed to you by somebody else. You're not a hand-me-down of somebody else's theology or value system. You are, you're carving the path, you're blazing the trail, you are trying to figure it out like we all are. And I think we share that. We have that in common. To be able to say, is it true? Where will the next journey take me when I come to the fork in the road? Which side makes the most sense? That's a cool place to be. And I go back again to the fact that we have much more in common than I think we ever have in disagreement. And I take a lot of inspiration from that, from you. So, that really encourages me as well.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Well, Seth, I'm curious for you, if any of our listeners, and I know it to be true, I've definitely been in this place, like, if anyone who's listening is considering atheism, if they're like, yeah, I don't know if I believe this anymore, I don't know if I buy this, what would you suggest to them? What's a good place to start?
Oh, atheism for a lot of people is a scary word. I like to use it because I want to try to normalize it, but it was terrifying to me 13 years ago. I mean, it's a scary word. Yeah. And part of that is cultural. Atheism it's one of those words people like to throw out because kill God, or I hate God, or I hate moral things. And those, Atheism simply means that I don't hold a God belief. I'm atheistic. I'm not theistic. I'm atheistic.
Yes.
And I don't really care too much about the labels. Some people don't like the word. They call themselves a seeker, or they think, I'm on a journey, or you can decide how you want to frame your own journey, man, But if you want to know more about how somebody like me comes to where I got, this is going to sound shameless, but I wrote it in a 2012 book called Deconverted, which chronicles some of what we've talked about. You mentioned The God Delusion by Dawkins. I know Dawkins is kind of a controversial and polarizing figure, but The God Delusion is a really good examination of God belief. So don't let the title throw you off. Don't let Dawkins throw you off. His name is another scare word.
Yeah.
I've had my agreements and disagreements with Dawkins on some stuff. But The God Delusion, there's a guy, he's an ex-pastor. He was kind of the Billy Graham of Canada. His name is Charles Templeton. He's since passed away. And he was preaching behind the pulpit. And he came to a point when he was genuinely curious and decided to reverse engineer his faith. And he ended up on the other side. His name is Charles Templeton. He wrote a book called Farewell to God. There's a lot of resources like that. Or you can just go there. I've got links to a bunch of stuff at thethinkingatheist.com. We've got over 500 podcasts where we talk about everything from Christianity to Islam to Scientology to other stuff. We get into some politics. We do fun stuff. I did a story a couple weeks ago about just good news stories because I was so disheartened by all the stuff that was going in the world. So we just went through and gave hope in humanity stories. Nice. I'm doing ghost stories in the month of October.
I love it
because I love Halloween and we love ghost stories. So every year we put together a series of stories where we go through ghostly haunted houses and we just do it for fun.
I love it.
So it really is a family and community. The short answer, thethinkingatheist.com or sethandrews.com. If you want to find any of that stuff, I've linked to a bunch of great opportunities and resources. Ultimately, though, my goal is not to infect you with atheism.
Yeah.
My goal, I think, is just to encourage you that you are not a hand-me-down. You're not an echo of somebody else's voice.
Yeah.
You're not charged to carry the family mantle. You don't have to live like them, think like them, speak like them, worship like them, vote like them. You get to decide what your value system is, who you are as an identity, what you think is right, And you get to sort of pursue truth on your own terms. And it's important you give yourself permission to do that. I know it's scary considering many of the consequences, but, take the journey on your terms. There is no way to describe how satisfying that kind of life is despite the difficulties. It's the kind of life I would hope for you.
Yeah. That was good, Seth. Yeah. One of my favorite things that I see in Jesus in particular is like, well, how do you read it? How do you interpret it? Who do you say that I am? It's not spoon feeding. It's not brainwashing. It's, it's just, like, well, here's what it is. What do you think? And I think that giving people permission to think for themselves and to not be beholden to a family system or, well, this is what my dad believes. And I think a common thing that pastors say that I've heard is like, God has no grandchildren. He has only children. And it's like, as cheesy as that is, I think what I like about it is it's like, well, again, like to your point, it's not inherited. So yeah, I think that's great.
And that's a little bit, again, in contrast to the Bible, which instructs parents to train up the child in the way that he should go. I mean, the Bible is telling parents, you need to download this stuff onto the hard drive of your kids so that they choose the straight and narrow. And that gets us back to, is that a moral thing? I find, not to drag this on, David,
No, please.
But, I want to draw a circle around something that your listeners can accept or reject. But, if we go through the Bible and we say, well, this doesn't feel right, and I know that's not right. The stoning of disobedient children and slavery and the beating of slaves and, the killing of pregnant women and, the slaughtering of hundreds of thousands, blah, 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 all of these things in the Bible, hell theology, whatever. And we say, no, I don't buy it. That doesn't pass the acid test for me. That's not moral. I reject it. Recognize that you are now making a moral judgment outside of the book that is supposed to be the moral foundation for an entire religion, right? You have to have the Bible, the Ten Commandments, the teachings of Jesus, Yahweh, whatever. You have to embrace that to be a good person, is what they often will tell us from fundamentalist churches. But if you say, well, no, I don't think slaves should be owned. I don't think that women are second-class citizens. I don't believe in murder and torture and genocide, etc. I don't hold to the idea of being burned to death in hell. That's terrible. You just made a moral decision or judgment, but you made it outside of the book that fundamentalist churches say is the arbiter of moral truth. And I think that's revealing because you are now recognizing that you don't require fundamentalist religion and their holy books to be able to know right from wrong and to make a moral decision. And I just think that's something that if it happens in your own life, recognize it. You evolved ethical systems, helping cooperation, benefiting ourselves and others, and knowing when something is wrong. It's not owned by religion, and often we'll make moral judgments far outside these supposed foundations of moral religion. I don't mind, just throw that out as kind of a cap to our conversation to see if anybody wanted to chew on that one. Okay.
Oh, I love it. Well, this has been such a joy. I really appreciate you coming on, Seth. One last thing I want to draw a circle around, as you said, is this idea of being an atheist. It's like that word, it can scare people, but I loved what you did in this reframing, and it's not rebranding or spinning it or anything. It's just, I don't believe in God.
And I think an honest life says, you know what, if I discover that God is real, if that evidence presents itself, I need to be prepared to say, okay. And then after that, we can get into the morality of God. Does that God deserve my allegiance and worship? But an honest life is prepared to change their mind whenever good evidence is presented. And I'll make that commitment to you and your viewers and listeners, David. If ever there is a demonstrable God, I will admit that it's real. I'll make that promise to you. Okay?
All right, Seth. Well, where can we go? I know you mentioned thethinkingatheist.com. Where can we go to find you and all your social links?
You can look for The Thinking Atheist on YouTube. I've got hundreds of uploads, speeches, and podcasts and whatnot. You can go to SethAndrews.com. I've got, a few links there. The most popular one being one that's dedicated to my dog, Linus. I actually have a new foster she's a foster fail named Gracie. She hasn't made it to the website yet. I need to add her, but I'm an animal person, like I'm a total pushover. SethAndrews.com. You can meet me and Natalie and the dog on that site. And so that'd probably be one of the places I'd say.
And that's where we can find you. Awesome, yeah. Seth. Thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
It's an honor. Thank you again.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.